Do you think the government is out of touch with public sentiment?
Right. 22 people said yes, and 2 people said no. 22 said yes, and 2 said no. All right. And of course, one of the people who said no said that they're doing it on purpose. They are not out of touch. They're deliberately doing that. Right?
Yeah, some people are saying that too.
Yeah, I can't see that possible. I don't see that. I don't see why a government would want to provoke people like that and say things like that to provoke people. That don't make sense to me. I think they're just out of touch. Some of them, that is. You know, they want to justify it, and they're going overboard to justify it and giving you poor examples, really, at the end of the day. That's all. So I believe that they're out of touch with public sentiment. And as I said, that gas thing, and somebody made a very good point to me the other day, in that when you make provisions in a budget, when you read a budget, nothing should be immediate, because the budget still has to be debated and passed. So only when that budget is debated and passed should those measures click in. So to say that gas raising immediately, that to me, the person raised the point that should not happen. It should only come after the budget is debated and passed. Any measure in the budget should not come immediately. Because I telling you, gas stations were closed up very early that day in anticipation of that increase, because they wanted to keep the gas to make that extra money. The gas that they would have bought at the cheaper rate, they wanted to keep it to make the extra money. And that can't be fair. So I support that theory that nothing should be immediate in a budget. It should only come after the budget is debated and passed. I support that. That's a good poll, though. That a budget nothing should be raised immediately in a budget. Maybe we could ask that either tomorrow or Friday, please.
Yeah, with immediate effect. No, yeah. I agree with you. And we have said that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Of course, while we wait on our guest to join us, our guest is Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath. He'll join us in a short. I think he's just about to log on.
All right.
Of course, welcome to those on YouTube, our YouTube channel, as we stream on our YouTube. Good morning to you, and of course, welcome to our YouTube channel, which we stream every morning at 7 o'clock, and on a Friday we let you join us on our stream. Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath is online. So good morning to you, Doctor. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on Power 102 Digital. I didn't think we've had you on for a long time.
Morning, Dr. Ragoonath. Dr. Ragoonath, of course, ran, and I don't know if he still does it, a very successful course at UE in local government. For many years, he would have done that.
Well, one of the many things that I've done at UE, and unfortunately, we're not running the course this year, but we hope to run it again soon.
Right. I remember that course well.
All right. Dr. Ragoonath, we asked the folks this morning. We had a poll this morning, so we'll just start off with that. Our question this morning was, do you think the government is out of touch with public sentiments? That was our poll this morning. You'd like to comment on that?
Well, I don't know your results, but I could tell you, from my perspective, yes.
I will tell you the real. 97% said yes.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Dorothy. Yes, Doctor.
So from my perspective, to some extent, the government is out of touch. I think they understand the realities, but for all intents and purposes, they have their own agenda, and they have decided to pursue their agenda, notwithstanding what is going to happen to the ordinary citizen on the streets. And for that reason, we have to say they are out of touch. I mean, I have heard, for instance, just this morning, again, somebody sent me again the link to look back at the video where Minister Paula Gopi-Schoon said that PTSD, is not a problem. People get buses all the time and they're on schedule and everything else. And I wonder which world is she living in. But you see, again, they are not using these means of transport. So they don't know. They simply hear what people tell them or what people want them to hear. And I think this is one of the problems with our government. Our government seems to be listening to a set of people who is telling them what they want to hear and not the realities. And since they are not experiencing it personally, they simply accept that as a given.
Well, strange enough, one of the people who said no, that they are doing it on purpose, kind of meshes with your description just now. Do you think that they might be doing these things and saying these things on purpose to get their message across?
Okay, so for instance, I would tell you that all the comments, for instance, about that have been repeated in the last few days, Shamfa Kojo telling you to sacrifice, Keith Scotland about the coal pot and whatever else, Marvin Gonzalez about the don't make macaroni pie and so on. Those things, I think, they are directed to say that. They are directed by the cabinet that they at all costs must defend the budget and must defend the policies that are enunciated in the budget. And to that extent, regardless of how ridiculous it sounds, they are going to go out there and say it to make sure that they are doing what they are required to do. Now, bear in mind, we could say what we want about PNM, but PNM follows strict discipline. And if you don't follow their discipline, you are excommunicated one way or the other. And this is why members of parliament who sit in the parliament and make these ridiculous statements are simply, in my opinion, they are simply following a directive that has been given to them and they have no other choice.
But I beg to differ because I'm a member of the PNM. I'm an elected official of the PNM. I've been for the last 20 or 23 years. And I don't know that any kind of directive to go out and say ridiculous things has ever come my way.
Well, man, I don't think they directed to say ridiculous things, but they directed to
defend the budget. I understand that. So I understand that part of what Dr. Ragoonath has said.
That go out and talk about sacrifice. Sacrifice is a common theme in everyone's presentation. Yeah. But what they're doing it is in an insensitive. They're not directed to go and be insensitive. They're just inexperienced and clumsy in the language, so they're sounding dotish plenty of the times. So, but I don't think they go out and sound dotish. Go out and talk about sacrifice as a keyword, as a talking point, but they're not doing it very well.
Yeah, well, clearly, yeah, so.
I don't know what you think, Dr. Ragoonath.
Definitely, I think, well, okay, so they weren't told to go and say ridiculous things. They went out there to defend the budget, and they just don't know better. They just say what they want to say, and that's the way it's coming across.
Yeah, clearly, they're not being very sensitive to the mood of the country right now. And the mood of their own supporters, because I support the PNM, but I can't support some of the things that are being said.
But look at the stark, and Dr. Ragoonath, you can comment on this. After Minister Kojo, Minister Scotland, which is the most ridiculous of all, quite frankly, I couldn't understand how that nonsense come out his mouth.
He's not a minister, though, is he? No.
Well, the MP Scotland. But pull out your cool pot and ride bike in 2022. And Minister Gonzalez made their commentary, the common theme being sacrifice and tighten your belt. Minister Al-Rawi came and said he understands people are hurting because he had the weekend to see the reactions.
Yes.
But definitely Minister Al-Rawi came out afterwards, and in a way, I think Minister Al-Rawi is trying to pacify a lot of the negative comments which came out against his colleagues. And therefore, he had no other choice but to say something like that. But the point about it here is simply one which says that I am not sure that our young ministers, and I have to say, young MPs, are schooled well enough in the art of putting forward their points. I was surprised that MP Scotland went that route, knowing that he's a trained lawyer and has been practicing at the bar for ever so long. But the point about it is that that's the way they thought that they had to go out and carry their message. Question, however, is simply one which says, what is the reaction and what is the impact that will have on the people? And that is a major import. That's a critical factor.
You will be teaching budget parliamentary presentation, but you didn't have to teach me. You learn the job. You know that, Dr. Ragoonath. Come on, with the articulation skills, but you also have to be sensitive in your presentation to what the context is on the streets.
Yeah,
and that I think is where we have the shortcoming. Are they really sensitive? No, they're not. They are simply doing a job that they have to defend, and they go at all costs and defend.
But also, I could add that when you look at, because clearly the leadership in both parties direct, I've seen it happen, their MPs for a particular narrative. Clearly, that they have a consistent narrative. We go out and this is our talking point. Because I've heard similar, how should I put it? Outlandish statements from the opposition on some points in the past. Is it that they are so inexperienced and looking to please their leaders that they lost as to what they're saying in the overall sense of it?
Well, I am not sure whether they simply going out there to please their leaders. I think they are playing to a public gallery, which they think that their leaders will be looking at, and the concern for them is simply from the UNC side, we must attack the PNM at all costs, regardless of what it says, and from the PNM side, vice versa. And we now have that situation where the party politics overwhelms everything else, even the notion that why are we there in Parliament? What are we supposed to be serving? And regardless of whether it's good for the country or bad for the country, we have to adopt a party line that is in opposition to the other party, and that's where we're going. And that, I think, is part of our biggest challenge as we move forward, because I think our leadership of the political parties, I'm not talking about the rank and file, I'm talking about the leadership of the political parties. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about the MPs and so forth. They are the ones who have now been, who are focused on power, that struggle for power, and they couldn't really be, they are no longer concerned about the man on the street who is their supporter, but basically they simply want to make sure that they stand ahead of the rest, and that's all they do.
I think they just don't understand that they come from a position in comparison to many other members of the country, many other citizens, if not the majority of citizens. They speak from a position of privilege, not only from their income, but from the power that they hold and wield. And when you come from that power, that position of power and privilege, and you're speaking to us about, cut back on movies, stop going movies twice a week, and maybe only go once or not go at all. Or, I use coal pot to do breadfruit, so maybe you can use that, and I am going to ride to work. Or the numerous other statements that were made. It comes across as if you're trying to give some sort of fatherly or motherly advice, but you come across condescending.
Mm-hmm.
Condescending is one thing, but the other side of it, in fact, yesterday I was in a conversation with some colleagues and so on, and I said, but do they understand what they are saying? And do they understand the implications of what they are saying? Take, for instance, Marvin Gonzalez, who came out and said, so do bake a ham once a month. I agree, don't bake a ham once a month. But two things to that. You're now talking about farmers who are producing pigs to produce the hams, and now you're telling them, well, fine. So those farmers must also suffer because you're now going to tell people, don't buy ham or don't buy as much ham as you should.
But Dr. Ragoonath, added to that statement from Minister Gonzalez was extremely insensitive, because there are people who eat ham in years.
Well, true. That's also
Or don't eat macaroni pie because they can't afford it.
right.
So
And,
insensitivity, as Richard said, the privilege that they feel everyone else has, that they take for granted.
My interpretation of it is that they feel by saying certain things, it will resonate with their followers. Because Paul had mentioned earlier on that both sides have been saying it. So you find that on the UNC side, they would talk about Suhari leaves and they would talk about oil and butter and things like that. And then on the other side, you're talking macaroni pie and cool pot and things. You feel you're saying something that will resonate with your supporters when in fact you're being condescending to them. That's my interpretation of it.
No, and I totally agree with you. They are being condescending, but I think it's not only condescending. I mean, we have to look and see what exactly is the implications of all of that they're saying. I mean, yes, you're carrying your message, and yes, you're doing what your party requires you to do, at least or the cabinet requires you to do, and the leadership of the party is asking of you. But the point about it is simply you yourself have to know what you stand for, and I am not sure some of them know what they stand for, whether they stand for anything at all, or it's simply a matter of it's a job for them and they're doing what they are being told to do.
Yeah, it's just mouth engaging before brain, right now. So you're saying things that you might normally have said in another environment, in another forum, but you're saying it in Parliament. It's being recorded and it's being broadcast across the world. So you just need to be more circumspect by how you put your message over, which is what Faris Al-Rari had the benefit of doing when he made his presentation, because he saw the reaction to something like that.
See, one of the things I'm concerned about is simply that when we talk about these things and what the media doesn't, what they don't realize, or they realize it and they are doing it deliberately, is simply everything you say now goes on social media. And it's going to be cut and paste, and depending on how, and this is one of the things that they should be concerned about. They should be, but I don't think they are at all, because it's simply a matter of the negative commentary. They take that as a pat on the back. Notwithstanding that it's a negative commentary towards them. And that
in Keith Scotland's case, I think he would be affected by how it came out, because I know Keith Scotland and I know he is somebody who really does a fantastic job in terms of advancing people who are less fortunate. So I know what he said and how it has come out. I know it's going to be affected. I can't say for the rest. I can't say for Brian Manning, because saying that if you have a premium, if you're using premium gas, is because you have a luxury vehicle. All small machinery uses premium gas. All whackers, blowers, pressure washers, they all use premium gas.
And that, I think, is you see, and that is where, when we say some of these members of parliament don't know the reality, and they don't know the reality of what these things, so for instance, those small machinery that you just referred to, they don't, I mean, anyone of them ever pick up a whacker or know what, I mean, they see workers using it, but they never use it, they don't know what it uses and so on. And that's where part of the problem is. They don't know what the ordinary people use. So for instance, and I go back to Paula Gopi-Schoon, the ordinary people use bus, but she don't know how, I don't know when last she probably traveled on a PTSD bus. And if she did, she traveled in one of those coaches that was probably chartered and was used in a luxurious way. But that's the reality, is how are ordinary people living. I mean, Paul made the statement about some people haven't eaten ham in months. Macaroni pie, when you consider that the price of cheese, some people just can't afford to make macaroni pie. I mean, macaroni pie was a Sunday staple. No, you can't afford it all that much. So now here comes the issue. When are they going to realize that their pockets and their salaries could allow them to live a particular life? lifestyle. But the ordinary man on the street isn't doing that. And that, I think, is a reality that we really have to face up with.
Yeah. You know what I would like to see? I would like to see one of them, one of the MPs slash ministers who have made those insensitive to come out and say, listen, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I should not have said what I said in the way I said it. But I would like to see that. That's what I would like to see, especially from Minister Gopi Skun, Minister Gonzalez, Brian Manning, and MP Scotland, four of whom I have great admiration for. I would like to see them step out and say, listen, I'm sorry, but I know it was an insensitive statement and it has caused...
But going back to Richard's point earlier about privilege, I remember during the height of the pandemic, a public official was doing their job and advising the population on how to navigate in your home. And the advice was, if someone in the house has COVID, use different bathrooms. So leave for the person with COVID, and I had to call them and said, not everyone has 2 bathrooms in their house.
Yeah.
So if you come from a particular social class, sometimes you forget how other people live.
Yeah.
Because you've been living a particular, and it's not that the person is trying to be cruel, It's just that you have become accustomed to a particular lifestyle that you ascribe to everyone else. Yeah. Is that the kind of disconnect we're talking about, Dr. Ragoonath?
That is the disconnect we're talking about, because they don't know how ordinary people live anymore, right? I mean, like yesterday I jokingly said, well, all right, fine, so we can't bake ham anymore. So probably go back and now get, long time the petrol tin in the yard, and you put the ham to boil in the outside. So maybe that's where we need to go. But the point about it, and I am not saying that that's a bad thing, that's probably a good thing. But the point about it here is simply one where you have to understand ordinary people. Some ordinary people some people who have lost jobs because of COVID and for other reasons don't have the luxury of even being able to send their children to school, to pay the transport on a daily basis. And that's a reality. I see it in a school that I am attached with. And I know for a fact that you have that kind of poverty. And I wonder whether certain MPs and ministers of government and MPs in the opposition actually know about some of these people, because sometimes, yes, they pass and they do the normal come and visit you and I'll come back and I'll get back to you. In fact, I know of a particular instance where a family had 2 children who were, right now they're adults, but literally they are with the minds of a 5-year-old. And the minister came, visited their home, who is also the MP for the constituency, came, visited their home and said, yes, we're going to help you and so on. 2 years later, the family has gotten absolutely nothing. And so it's a good PR to go out there and say, yes, we're going to meet and do something. And then nothing happens. And that's a reality for many people who live at the lower levels of income and in status in our society.
Well, that Dr. Ragoonath is, and you make a great point there, because it's again an example of the disconnect. It took me back to when the Minister of Education, when the SEA results came out and put the systems in place for remedial in July, August. And of the 9,000 students, 2,700 attended, less than 1/3. And the minister was totally absent of the fact that there are parents who look forward to this July, August vacation, so they don't have to spend money to send their children to school because they don't have the money.
They don't have the money.
So because you put it in place doesn't mean that they can afford to or are willing to participate, even if it's in the interest of their children, because they don't have the resources to participate.
And one of the things that I think that the minister probably in putting that program forward was the location of some of the schools. I mean, yes, you try to put it in some central locations, but for all intents and purposes, people needed to get transport to go to some of these institutions, and they just couldn't afford. I know that. So we have this problem of this disconnect. And Paul is right in saying, yes, it's simply a matter that some people have gone so far in their lives and living in their in the social class that they are in, that they have forgotten how other people have to survive.
If we could just switch gears just a bit, Dr. Ragoonath, what are your thoughts on the challenge being made to Dr. Rowley's political leadership of the PNM by former Finance Minister Karen Nunes-Teixeira?
Okay, so Karen's entry into the race is a good thing for the PNM. It's a good thing for the PNM in that, yes, we're going to have that somebody challenging the political leader. However, I also know that everything is stacked against Karen Nunes-Teixeira. One, Karen has been operating outside of the party per se, and she has admitted that she has not been close to the inner workings of the party for some time, and she has stayed deliberately away. Two, she's going up against an incumbent leader who has the party machinery and everybody who is currently there is working with that current political leader. Three, that political leader is the sitting prime minister. And I don't think, I mean, in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean, we don't have that culture where you change a political leader who is a sitting prime minister. That will happen in England. That wouldn't happen in Trinidad. And that, I think, is one of the real big issues that we have to understand, party politics. Now, if we were coming close to the election, when I say close to a general election, I could see somebody, the leader saying, well, all right, let's look and find an alternative leaders who will take the party into an election. But when you have a situation like this, where we're still talking about the general election being 3 years away, and the political leader who is sitting prime minister is willing to put his hand forward and contest the election, it is really a challenge that is going to be taken on.
So then do you think then that, because if you've listened to her thus far, she has focused on Dr. Rowley in saying certain things about him and about his leadership and about his more so his prime minister stewardship, as opposed to party issues. Do you think that she's using this as a forum just to deal with issues of that nature?
Well, so far that is what we have heard. And she's dealing with it on a prime ministerial issue, which again is not what the party is looking for, right? The party knows that it has a political leader and who happens to be prime minister, and we're going to work with that. But when we understand what Karen Nunes-Teixeira is doing, is that she started her campaign, or at least this from what we have heard so far. She started a campaign hitting on some of the weaknesses, as she sees, of Keith Rowley, which suggests that she is presenting herself as a conscience, not of Karen Nunes-Teixeira, not of members of the PN, but as a conscience of the citizenry at large. So, for instance, when she talked about Keith Rowley being a vulgar person and in his speech and so forth, I mean, those were things that the citizenry at large would have raised. Now, was that something that would have been raised significantly within the bowels of the party? Prime Minister, you need to tone down on some of these things. I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I know, for instance, a senior member of a former senior member of the PNM, who sat on the Council for Responsible Behavior with me, used to be criticizing the political leader many a times. But of course, he could do that within closed doors, not publicly.
Right.
And Karen Nunes, the sheriff, by coming out and showing that, hey, look, I am representing a conscience of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's good. But is it good enough to sway any significant portion of the PNM membership to want to support her? And two, does it come across? No, we use the word condescending before in another context, but does it come across as to some extent you are being condescending even towards the members of the PNM who have supported and embraced and consolidated around Keith Rowley? And that is something that, again, we have to look at and see how we move forward and how she moves forward. Now, I looked at the television interview that she did earlier this week, and she was critical. And of course, when the interview ended, she said, wait, I didn't talk about the other side of it and so on. But we need to hear her full campaign. And what I would like to also see is whether or not she's coming with a slate, or whether she's going as an independent person going to challenge the leadership.
Yeah, that would be interesting. That would be interesting. I don't know if my colleagues might show up somewhere along the line. I'm waiting to see.
Well, people have thrown various kinds of things in up in the air already. I mean, some people talk about Mariano Brown and others, but like I say, I am waiting to see when nomination day comes and goes, that we see a list, and we have to look and see whether or not she has a slate, whether she's going up as an independent, whether she's just simply going to try to undermine the strength of the leadership of Dr. Rowley, and both as political leader and as prime minister. Now, bear in mind that several of things, for instance, that she has said within the recent past. So, for instance, when she talked about, when she went on a platform, I think she had Timothy Hamilton and several others on a platform which were basically anti-PNM people. And she talked about the gutting of the procurement act and so forth, and being critical of the PNM. Now, PNM is not a party that washes its dirty linen in public. PNM is a party that consolidates. And if there's a challenge, if there's an issue, that is something that we have to deal with. And we have to deal with it clearly and precisely as a party, and it's going to be done internally. I mean, I always remember many years ago, you talk about my local government training. Many years ago, I remember a former general council member of the PNM who was the chairman of a local government corporation, came to me and said, that was one, I think, when they were talking about the green people, the white people on local government reform. And he came to me and says, Doc Kiana, we need to say certain things about this bill, this white people or this green people, But the PNM doesn't provide me within the party with a forum for me to say it. And in fact, as he told me that, the following week or so, I remember going to international meeting, and the Minister of Local Government was with me, and I said, Minister, this is a concern. And she looked at me and said, Vishnu, who said that? And I told her who said it. And then she turned to the then Mayor of Port of Spain, who was also with us, and said, but Mia, you all never tell me that this was a concern within the party. And of course, this is a concern. Even within the party, do they have the fora to allow for that kind of open discussion? Now, you said, for instance, that you were never directed to say ridiculous things, and I agree with you. But the question is, at what levels these directions come? And it's not a matter of saying ridiculous things, it's a matter of telling them, do a particular thing. It's how they interpret it and how they operationalize it. That's a different issue.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the concerns.
Yeah. We have a local government election that's due. And is it that you think, first question, do you think it will be called sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner, with regard to public sentiment and
and the sort of response that they're getting from the budget and what many ministers and members of parliament would have said. Because I believe the PNM is a party that is sensitive to what's going on in the public. And they are sensitive, and I think they do their own internal polling as the year progresses, etc. One. And two, do you think other parties have a chance in the local government elections? I'm specifically thinking the NTA, the National Transformation Alliance, under Gary Griffith, and, well, possibly the PDP under Farley and Watson Duke, depending on how that relationship goes.
Are you sure it's Farley there too? Okay, all right. Well, we'll come back to that. But coming back to this sooner rather than later, the election. Okay, so PNM has always had a policy that we will not have a party convention in the year that we have an election. So we know that the party convention is going to be held in December, the elections of the new executive and so on. So clearly that takes precedence, one. Two, the party, the term ends, I think, around the 12th of December.
Second.
Huh?
Second.
Is second, or is it from the day of the first sit-in?
Well,
Yeah.
well, you will know better than me that, I think, but I know that the election was, the last
The
election
was on the second, but the
Yes.
first sit-in was around the 12th or something like that.
Okay.
Right. So they have until the 12th of March to have the elections in accordance with the existing legislation without asking for any extension. And my perspective on that is simply that I think that the elections will be held. Dr. Rowley is one who has always kept his word that elections will be held when they are required to be held. And I think we're going to have an election. I probably think it will be in the new year. Whether it's before Carnival or after Carnival, we really have to wait and see. The point about it is, I think it's going to be held, and I think it's going to be held in 2023, somewhere between the middle of January or closer to the middle of March. So that's my thinking on that. As to the other question, in terms of the parties having a chance, the NTA and the PDP, bear in mind that several things is expected to happen. One, by early next year, the real impact of, for instance, the increase in fuel prices and everything else will have taken fully effect, and people would have recognized it and understood what was the impact. So even supporters of the PNM will know that. Now, the question is, in a local government election, are people fired up enough to go and vote? And the answer to that question is no. They're not fired up because we're not changing our government and so forth. Less, on average, between 38 and 40% of the electorate normally will go out and vote. People, and out of that 38 to 40% who will normally go out and vote in a local government election, that is assuming that is the core of both the PNM and the UNC. But bearing in mind that we could have the amount of disaffection within both the PNM supporters and the UNC supporters, I think as we go into this local government election, we might have an even lower turnout than previous. Now, so that presents us with or presents those parties with some degree of a challenge. Whether the NTA or the PDP is mobilizing or has mobilized sufficiently or will have mobilized sufficiently in time for that that local government election, I am not sure I am seeing in the works just yet that type of mobilization. No, it's still early days. We still have a lot of time. And depending on anything that could happen in the politics, I would not say that the PDP and the NTA could have a fair showing. A fair showing, however, does not mean that they could win seats. A fair showing simply means that they could probably get in there and probably upset some of the traditional party trends, and that could be creating a problem for one party or the other. So, for instance, in terms of the PDP. Mr. Duke has said, for instance, and he has gone through parts of the East-West corridor and says, I'm going to put down my bucket here, and this is where I'm going to start the fight. And I'm going to try and undermine, for instance, in the East-West corridor, the only person undermining is the PNM. And clearly, that might be the strategy. Now, the question is, will he have or win sufficient support to have that election decided on a plurality, where UNC, for instance, come in and say, all right, fine, if some of the PNM votes go the PDP way, well, then the UNC could slip in and win the election. It's a hard issue to decide at this point in time based on the current state of the politics. But it is something that we have to bear in mind. I have not seen, for instance, the NTA coming out with a clear strategy thus far. So I am waiting to see where they are going to, again, focus their attention as we move forward. Yes, they're looking at a national elections, but again, it's something that we really have to wait and see. Of course, I think all of them will be waiting to see how this PNM internal elections plays out. Not that they would expect that Pete Rowley would be removed, but rather whether or not slates are being developed and whether or not the PNM could come out divided or some way hurt as a result of this internal election.
But wouldn't the PDP be less of an issue now because of the, and I'm using the term credibility, the credibility issue of the disunity that played out optically, at least, with Farley and Watson Duke? So wouldn't people say, well, okay, you know, there's a way that people dismiss parties that have too much disunity that they don't think you become credible as an alternative? But wouldn't that have affected PDP?
All right, the correct word is bacchanal rather than disunity. All right. Whether or not we look at it from that perspective is simply, now bear in mind that Farley is homegrown Tobagonian. The local government elections playing out in Trinidad. Duke has some degree of personal support in Trinidad based on his PSA representation. And I think that is what he's going to try to mobilize on and build on. Yes, the bacchanal in the PDP in Tobago is one of the things that is going to play on some people's minds. That, but then again, we know for a fact that beyond Tobago, we had a deputy political leader in Trinidad who came out fully in support of Watson Duke. So if that is going to, and that is the platform upon which they're going to build, we really have to wait and see how it plays out in Trinidad, because really and truly, what Duke is hoping to attract in Trinidad is those people who believe they have so been impacted negatively upon by the PNM administration, and he's going to try to draw them out and say, all right, fine, come support us and let us send a message to the PNM. Will that following be strong enough? I don't think so at this point in time. But whether it could create some degree of concern for the PNM, yes, I think it should be considered.
And the NTA, obviously, they are hoping, you know, a lot of times we speak to people about third parties and why third parties have such a difficult time in Trinidad and Tobago. And you've had third parties that had hundreds of thousands of supporters who would have voted them but didn't win a seat. And so the ability of a third party to unseat the two major parties, the UNC and the PNM, in a seat seems very difficult. Do you think that the NTA under Gary Griffith has the chance to win any seat at all? Looking at the national elections, which is of course a few years away, so lots can happen in those few years. But do you think at this point that that's even plausible?
And I hear you on that, and I have to ask a question, and it's a serious question that somebody has raised with me, and I give it some thought to that. We have to look for see whether or not. To what extent is the NTA a solid party? When I say a solid party, a party that will stand on its own. Somebody has suggested to me, for instance, if tomorrow morning the UNC comes and tells Gary Griffith, Gary, come lead the UNC, will Gary dump the NTA and jump and lead the UNC?
I can answer that.
You want to give my answer to that? No perspective?
I think we all know the answer to that.
Exactly. Good.
Yeah.
So you see, and that's where we could talk whether it's a solid party. One. Two, the other aspect of it, and I'm saying, no, this is Gary alone. I'm not talking about the NTA and other supporters of the NTA. I'm talking about Gary. The offer is made to Gary, and Gary said yes. Okay. So that's one of the issues. The second issue, however, and I think this is where, when you ask the question whether the NTA could win a seat, I think yes, they could win a seat. I think yes, they could win a seat. But they could win that seat in the context of having some sort of coalition.
Yeah, arrangement.
Yes.
Voting arrangement.
Some sort of arrangement where they go up 1-to-1 against the PNM, and the other parties throw their support behind the NTA, NTA candidate. So, for instance, Gary Griffith has said, I want to challenge Keith Rowley in his home ground. I want to challenge Keith Rowley in Diego Martin West. And very well, if, for instance, the UNC decides, well, all right, we're not going to contest Diego Martin West. We're going to leave it alone for Gary Griffith to challenge Keith Rowley. And then we're going to now lend our support to the NTA and let Gary Griffith go forward and support him and tell our supporters, vote for him. And Gary Griffith will pick up his own support base and then our UNC support base and whoever else may want. And yes, so there's that possibility that the NTA could win seats. And particularly, so I use Diego Martin West because that's Keith Rowley's seat, and that's where Gary Griffith has already said he intends to go. But it's not limited to Diego Martin West. It could happen along the east-west corridor where the UNC know that they're not all that strong. They know that they're not strong, not all that strong. They're not strong at all, right? So yes, you might talk about St. Joseph and Tunapuna might be those marginal seats that we have always talked about. But the point about beyond St. Joseph and Tunapuna, what about the other seats? And that's
Well, Dr. Ragoonath, exactly what you're describing happened in 2010 with the People's Partnership, where the COP came together with the UNC, amongst other parties, and they contested. That's how they won Lupino Bonnier West with Dr. Lincoln Douglas, how they won Davidio Mayor with Anil Roberts, because they were COP candidates. So the UNC backed out of those seats and allowed the COP to go forward and throw their support behind them. That's how they were able to win in a lot of those seats.
And that is what, and that's the way I expect the NTA to build its momentum within the East-West corridor.
Yeah.
So yes, I am not writing off the NTA at all. And this is why when you ask the question, I started off first by posing the question: if the UNC asks Gary tomorrow, what will Gary do? And in that context, that's where you have to talk about those kinds of coalitions. Now, bear in mind, there's the other player in the game, because there's always been the suggestion. The PNM has said it over and over, from way back 2017, we heard it back in 2020, we heard it back in 2021 about the Watson Duke being funded by certain UNC elements. And they have said it over and over. It's not something that could be written off. And that's another issue that you have to look at now. Whether or not, for instance, what is the role of the Watson Duke fraction of the PDP in the Trinidad and Tobago, in the Trinidad politics as we move forward. And that is something that, and how closely could they be affiliated or aligned with the UNC, and will they be willing to have some sort of accommodation with the UNC in challenging the PNM in some of the, again, PNM traditional seats?
Yeah, just enough to take away some support so that someone else could slip through.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree with your analysis on that. Yeah.
All right. Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath, I want to thank you so much for being on the Power Breakfast Show on Power 102 Digital. It's quite an enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure.
All right. All the best to you. Be safe and be dry.
Same to you.
All right, Doctor.
All right. Thank you. Take care. All right.
Steve, give them the bad news now, because I get so frustrated in our last
Ragoonath. So we were watching Australia play West Indies in the T20. Started at 4 a.m. this morning. Came down to the last ball.